Join our pack. Subscribe to start your adventure. Chapter 5. I could do nothing but stare at my dad. I attempted to open my mouth to speak, but it was as if someone was squeezing my vocal cords shut. All I could see was fire in my father's eyes, and from the look on his face, he already knew the answer to his question. "Dad, wait, you forced a mark upon my daughter without permission." I was shocked at my father's cold tone. I've never seen him so angry. Even my mother looked shocked as she looked to her husband. Blaine wasn't fazed as he kept eye contact with my dad, both sharing dark, dangerous looks. My dad wanted to lunge at Blaine, but my mom held him back. He was bordering on the edge of control. "How dare you mark my daughter?" Blaine stayed silent for a minute before speaking. "At least I didn't reject her." His voice had an underlining taunt directed at my father. My mouth was literally agape as I looked towards my mate stunned, and appalled that he would sagely since it's such a sore subject for my family. "At least my father didn't kill my mother," my dad replied with the same taunting voice. The whole area went silent, tension filling the air. Blaine's body stiffened as he ground his teeth before he clenched his jaw tightly. He was trying to control his wolf, as he closed his eyes, but his other side had already dominated his body. A menacing snarl erupted from his throat, his normal gorgeous green eyes of his swirling with pecks of black as his wolf came out. "Hold her," Blaine demanded to two of his men who were standing behind me. I knew my father had pushed Blaine too far, and I was disgusted by his comment. I was just as disgusted at Blaine's. Right now, I needed to comfort my mate, but before I could attempt to move, their arms instantly wrapped around my arms, forcing me to stand still. "Let me go," I said harshly, as I struggled to pull out of their tight grip. I knew Blaine wanted to go for the kill. "Blaine, please," I begged, tears welling up in my eyes. I didn't want to watch how I could be mated with a man who wanted to fight my father. I never thought this would be the way the first meeting would turn out, with my mate meeting my parents. "No, Kennedy. He crossed the line and now he's going to pay for it." He snarled, his voice sounding dangerous calm as he removed his shirt, showing everyone his prominent scars. "He's my father, Blaine. Please don't do this." My tone was wavering as I tried to plead with him to stop. "It's fine, Kennedy. This pup needs to learn a lesson," my dad growled, as he began to step forward towards Blaine. My dad also had my mom surrounded by his enforcers, including his beta and third Eli. My mom was ordering them in her alpha tone to let her go, but because my dad ordered them to hold her, they had to listen to my father, as he is the main leader of their pack. Meaning his words overrides my mother's. It was their priority to protect their Luna. Blaine cracked his jaw at the disrespect my father had showed him by calling him a pup. It was one of the biggest insults for an alpha. Blaine especially found it contemptuous due to killing his father at 15 for the alpha title, which he then had to battle various pack members or rogues who believed he was too weak to be leader. Tears were freely flowing down my face as I desperately tried to stop them. Blaine was in arm's reach and I wrestled my way out of the enforcers to grab him. My fingers only managed to brush against his skin, causing small sparks to fly up my hands. Blaine moved forward, avoiding me, and unfortunately only caused his men to hold me back firmer, pushing me into a circle of enforcers, meaning there was no way for me to escape to stop the fight that was about to transpire. Blaine shifted into his large wolf and in a flash lunged straight for my dad, knocking him off of his feet. He was clearly caught off guard. He had managed to roll away from Blaine before he was able to nip down on his sides. He shifted into his equally as large wolf. Vicious growling was all that could be heard as they began attacking each other. All I could see was flashes of their bodies colliding. It was all happening so fast and Blaine's men were blocking my view. Panic struck me as the smell of blood entered my senses. I knew both of them were bleeding. "Stop!" I screamed as loudly as I possibly could, trying to fight my way out of an enforcer's arms. I knew both their wolves had overtaken and was prepared to kill their component. I had to stop it. I couldn't witness my mate or my dad hurting or even killing each other. But they ignored mine and my mother screaming as we begged them to stop. My dad had managed to claw Blaine in the face, causing a loud yelp to escape Blaine's snout. I watched as his muscles flexed tensely and he moved into a predatory stance while my dad did the same, hunching down opposite him. Through their eyes you could see them challenging each other to make the first move. Both began to circle as their bodies shifted, emphasizing their power and strength, their muscled shoulder moving up and down as they circled each other. I could see that my father's shoulder was causing him a lot of pain from his limping, as blood was flooding out of the wound while Blaine's neck was matted with blood. They continued to circle, assessing each other. They were in a stand-off situation, teeth bared, ears back, feet parted and bodies low to the ground, ready to pounce when their opponent dropped their guard. Neither one of them was prepared to submit. They were both too damn stubborn. I couldn't stand it anymore and managed to squirm my way out of the tight grip that an enforcer had on me and was able to escape through them. In a quick motion, Blaine throws himself into my father with such power, speed and precision. I could see that his wolf now had all control. There was no sight of Blaine. His natural instinct was to kill after years of having the same ruthless and brutal mentality that his father had drilled into his mind. I needed to stop them, even if it meant I had to throw myself into the middle of their fight and get myself injured. I didn't have time to shift into my wolf, so I did something totally stupid by jumping into the middle of a wolf fight with my human body, not thinking about any repercussions. My negligent actions caused chaos as it caught them both unexpectedly. Blaine had knocked my body powerfully in the side and my dad had caught me in my legs, causing me to go flying. A loud piercing scream escaped my mouth as I landed harshly on the cold hard ground. A severe tingling sensation shot up my spine, causing me to arch my back painfully. I let out soft whimpers and Blaine instantly shifted, pulling my stiff body to his, carefully not wanting to hurt me further. My chest felt heavy from holding my breath and already I could feel my lungs begging for some air. I heard him take in deep breaths as he inhales my scent. He pulled back, showing me that his wolf was still in control as his eyes were still flashing a ruthless black. I could see in his eyes that he was in a panic and has gone into complete protective mode as he growled when anyone approached us. I could hear my mom hysterically crying and quickly making her way over to me, grabbing my hand reassuringly while whispering that everything was going to be all right. I wanted to speak, but I was struggling to breathe. All my air was taken from me when I harshly landed on the floor, completely winding myself. Just breathe. You need to take in deep breaths, Blaine demanded, but his voice was soft, wanting to soothe me. He could tell that I was trying to speak but didn't have the energy or capability of doing so. Where's George? Blaine shouted harshly while stroking the stray hair out of my face. Where is he? He questioned angrily. He had already told me that he had mind-linked his packed doctor, who I guess is called George. Only a minute after Blaine's harsh questioning, a tall man around the age of 40 was instantly by my side. Before he did anything, he introduced himself to me, before rushing out numerous questions which Blaine was quick to answer yes or no to. He suddenly pulled up my top up to the wire of my Brock Oz in a growl to escape Blaine's mouth, making George immediately drop the fabric. Sorry, Alpha, George mumbled apologetically, feeling like he just disrespected both Blaine and me. I need to check her ribs and her spine as there's a possibility that she has damaged or even broke one of them, but in order to do that I need to lift up her shirt. Whispering the last 7 words. Blaine's wolf was still present in his eyes. He was worried that George was going to hurt me further, plus I haven't fully mated with him. And nothing more than jealousy drives a wolf crazy. They want their scent to be the only scent marking the mate's skin. Let him check her. Honey, it could get worse the longer you leave it. Lena's voice echoed as she kneeled down next to Blaine, holding onto his shoulder. I wondered for a second how she got here, but was too focused on Blaine to question it. Blaine took in a deep breath before nodding for George to continue. He kept his eyes trained on George the whole time while he examined my stomach. Every time I flinched or winched from George's touch, he would lowly growl a warning to stop touching in that area, which would cause George to instantly remove his hands. "Will my daughter be all right?" my dad asked, concerned, kneeling down on the opposite side of me after chucking shorts on. Thankfully, there are no fractured or broken bones, just heavy bruising which would disappear in a few days. He looked in thought. "Or we could inject her with some of your blood alpha, which will progress the healing process quicker," he suggested. He spoke with much more confidence as he looked at my father, then at Blaine for the next step. "The second option," Blaine said instantly, without thought. "Okay, Alpha. We need to take her to the pack infirmary in order to complete the blood transfusion." One of Blaine's pack members passed him a pair of shorts. He quickly stood up and changed before leaning down and delicately maneuvered his arms underneath my body, careful not to cause me any further pain as he lifted me up off of the ground. I winched slightly as he pulled me towards his chest, but the heat radiating off of him was hot and comforting like a fire, making me snuggle closer to his body. "I should also check out both yours and Alpha Gabriel's wounds with your permission," George said as we all walked towards Blaine's home, which also had a pack infirmary, but only a small one as the main one was located in the main pack house. "I'm fine, George. If Gabriel would like to be checked out, then he may," Blaine responded. I frowned before turning my head to face George. Blaine would love to be checked out. Now it was Blaine's turn to frown and look down at me with a raised eyebrow. "Please, just do it to put my mind at ease. I wanted to make sure that my mate was okay too." He sighed before nodding slightly, making a small smile appear on my face as we continued to head towards his house. And I soon found myself laying down on one of the hospital beds in the infirmary. It smelt so strong of sterilizer that it made my nose twitch. Blaine sat on the edge of my bed and refused to be treated before me. So George quickly got all the equipment he needed in order to proceed with the transfusion. I wanted to cringe as George injected a large needle into Blaine's and I had to look away while Blaine simply looked like it didn't faze him. I leaned back nodding and closed my eyes when George asked me if I was ready. I could already feel Blaine's blood healing my body faster than it would normally for a werewolf. Your mate's blood could heal you even quicker than at our normal rate. After I was done, I watched as Blaine and my father got checked out. They both suffered from deep bite wounds and my father had a fractured collarbone which would heal within a week. "How are you feeling, Kenny?" my mom questioned worriedly after she found out that my dad was all right. "I'm fine, Mom," I said, smiling, wanting to reassure her. Blaine hadn't said anything to me, just glazed into my eyes, silently waiting for answers. I knew he wanted to shout and scream at me for getting involved. "What did you think you were playing at? You could have got seriously hurt," Blaine said. His voice may be calm, but his demeanor was anything but. His knuckles was crunched tight to the side of his body as he towered over me. "Blaine, I'm not going to stand there and watch my father and my mate kill each other. I'm only slightly bruised. It's no big deal," I said, dismissing the conversation. Blaine was furious with my answer and was about to reply but was interrupted. "She wouldn't even be feeling bruised if you," my dad said, looking straight at Blaine. "Hadn't forcibly marked her without permission, then we would have never crossed paths." Blaine's wolf resurfaced once again. He was about to stalk over to my father when I quickly grabbed his hand, stopping him while giving him a pleading look. His jaw clenched and I knew he wanted to say something, but he didn't for me. But you could hear my mom scolding my dad at his childish behavior, while reminding him of when they were young, which caused my father to instantly go silent. Blaine snickered at my father, which made a glare get sent his way. Thankfully, Lena walked through the door, stopping an argument from starting. "Would you like to stay for dinner? There's plenty of food." I decided on making a variety. Spaghetti, steak, chicken, etc., she offered, looking at my mother. "No," my father started. "We would love to. Wouldn't we, Gabriel?" my mother said a little forcibly. I laughed quietly to myself after hearing my father's reply. "Would love to, honey." he replied in a high voice sarcastically while Blaine grumbled agitated lie. After being cleared by George, we were allowed to leave. Lena was directing us to the main dinner hall, while introducing herself properly to my mother. She also explained that both the Black Moon and Dark Apollo Pact members were currently sitting in the dining hall waiting for our arrival. We walked into the room and every set of eyes landed on us. I could feel them looking at me from head to toe, analyzing if I was okay. Blaine's pack especially, since I'm now their Luna. Packs are extremely protective of their Lunas as they help hold the pack together. If their alpha female was upset, then they would feel it. We made our way to our seats on the same side as our packs. My mother and father were standing on the opposite side of the table, with my dad facing Blaine and my mom facing me. Both men's eyes didn't move from the others. Their glares were harsh as they waited for Lena to give us the okay to sit down. "Please sit." Lena smiled as she walked into the huge dining hall. The tension in the room was awkward and everyone was tense. It was clear that both my father and Blaine hadn't finished their fight and wanted more. I knew this was going to be an intense dinner. Both Mum and I sat down, including Blaine's and my dad's pack members who were also attempting to tempt the other pack into a fight. "Sit," Lena said forcibly as Blaine and my dad still stood, almost daring each other to sit down first. A sickly smirk appeared on my mate's face as he gestured for my dad to sit down. A low growl left my mouth and I rolled my eyes, irritated that they were still continuing and acting like children. They sat down at the sound of my annoyed growl, but they continued to grumble with their eyes narrowed on one another. Some of Blaine's pack mates came out handing everyone their plates. No one spoke except for saying thank you. We all just sat in silence as they walked in out of the dining hall bringing in our food. Once everyone had their food placed in front of them, we began eating. It was silent for a while. You could only hear the conversation between my mother and Lena as they talked about pack life and their children. It was awkward and I just sat there silently hoping this would end soon so I could leave as the tension was killing me. But of course, my father and Blaine had to continue to make snide comments to one another throughout dinner. Blaine didn't like one of my father's comments and what he was insinuating as Blaine began firmly gripping a glass in his hand. His grip was getting tighter as he stared at my father. Blaine, trying to catch his focus, but it didn't work as his grip tightened. The sound of a glass smashing caught everyone's attention as they looked to Blaine, who had blood dripping down his arms from the cuts in his hands. Blaine still had a large piece of sharp glass in his palm and he continued to crush it while staring at my father, with a deadly look in his eye. He abruptly stood up, sending his chair flying backwards. He collided his fists to the table, crushing his hands into the pieces of broken glass. He was breathing heavily, and looked like he was in the middle of trying to shift. I went to place my hand on his arm, but he pulled away before stalking down the hall. A rush of hurt and sadness rushed through my body, making my heart hurt. I was furious at my father. It was my decision for me to forgive and it was up to me on what I wanted to do. Blaine may have marked me by force, but I still wanted him. He was my soulmate, after all. I sent my father a harsh glare before getting up from my chair, thanking Lena for the food and following Blaine's scent, leading me to the double doors which I assumed was his office. I knocked and walked in, knowing that Blaine would ignore me if I didn't. He was sitting behind a large desk, roughly putting out pieces of glass from his palm. I quietly walked over to him. He knew I was there as he looked at me for a second before continuing to pull the glass out of his hand. I carefully grabbed his arms, stopping him. He looked at me questionably and I sighed sadly. "Can I look?" I received a nod in reply. I scanned my eyes over the skin and saw any small wounds and pieces of glass stuck deep in his palm. "Do you have any tweezers? There's some in the medical aid box in the bathroom under the sink." Quickly searching for the tweezers, I made my way back to Blaine and sat on his lap, startling him slightly from catching him off guard. But he pulled me closer and wrapped his uninjured arm around my waist and allowed me to tend to his wounds. When I was finished, I got up and grabbed his arm, which he willingly let me pull, and guiding him to the bathroom in his office. He didn't flinch or even make a sound as I carefully ran his hand under the cold water, even though I knew it was stinging. We just stayed there in silence. I could feel the piercing gaze he had on the side of my face before speaking in a deadly tone. "If he's not off my territory in the next 10 minutes, then I'm going to kill him, your father or not." Chapter 6. I was on pause. My body felt frozen in place. I didn't even turn to look at him after he basically threatened my father's safety, which definitely didn't settle well with me. I slowly turned the cold tap off and removed my fingers from our entwined hands, only for Blaine to tug my hand back to his in a tight hold, making it impossible to pull my hands from his. We both stayed there, neither one of us talking. I just stood there not looking at him, fuming. How dare he disrespect my family like that? My father is no angel, but they're both acting completely irrational and immature. I needed to address my father and make sure that he knows that I'm old enough to make my own decisions without him dictating everything I do, which Blaine also needed to understand. I looked over at him. His facial expression showed nothing, but I could see the solemn look in his eyes, showing me how serious his comment was. I knew deep down that he meant every word he said. I didn't doubt that he wouldn't following through with his threat. "You and my father will agree to disagree, but do not threaten my family, because that's just disrespectful to me. All he wants to do is protect me. Protect you from what exactly, me?" he said harshly, interrupting my sentence. I chose to ignore his comment and continued with mine. I rolled my eyes. "Even if he's trying to protect me from my mate, he's only doing what you would do if it was your pup. It's a natural instinct for a wolf to protect its young, and you know this." His eyes flickered with a flash of emotions when I mentioned having his own pup. I knew family meant a lot to him, especially since his was taken from his when he was only 15. I moved to stand slightly closer to him, but not in his embrace. Our hands were still entwined, dangling down the side of our bodies. I needed him to understand my father was so protective and overbearing when it came to me. When I was 4, I was taken from my father's territory by a rogue alpha and my mother's ex-boyfriend. My mother's ex, Nate, became possessive over my mom when they were dating. His wolf believed that she was his real mate, even though he knew she had been rejected by my father. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nobel, hearts out thanks for your unsailing patience, enthusiasm. He became controlling and demanding when he did meet his real mate. He strangled her in front of my mom. Blaine pulled my body close to his, almost wanting to protect me from my own emotions. When my mom finally found the opportunity to escape him, she took me to my grandparents' house in California after living the first few years of my life in Texas. We both ended up accidentally bumping into my father, and he refused to let her leave even though he rejected her years before. When they finally accepted their mate connection, they decided to celebrate by having a pack barbecue to introduce me and my mom into the pack. But while I was playing on the swings, Nate came over to me. I was only 4 and I would call him my uncle, so I willingly followed him. He ended up chucking me into a cell in an old dirty warehouse in the middle of the woods. I was randomly beaten and the rogue alpha's pack members felt like it. That my scar, my voice began to waver as all the memories and flashbacks came back to me. I reached up and touched my cheek, where my scar lies, with my hand, but was soon replaced by Blaine's touch. I sighed and slowly closed my eyes while Blaine softly caressed my scar by running his thumb gently across it. My scar was given to me by Nate when he got angry that my mom had mated with my father instead of him. He was envious and bitter and took his frustration out on me, a 4-year-old girl. Ever since, my father has been protective of me, fearful that he will lose me again. He's lost me twice and now he feels like it's happening again, so he doesn't want me to slip from his grasp. He just wants me to stay thin, be free from harm, even if he's protecting me from my own mate. I slowly wrapped my arms around Blaine's waist and he wrapped his arms over my shoulders, pulling me closer. Resting my chin on his chest, I looked up at him before giving him a pleading look. "I need you to get on with my father. He has good intentions, but his mind is clouded by unwanted memories. I don't agree with what he said to you. Like I don't agree with what you said to him. Can you please at least just try to get along for my sake? How can I possibly be with you if you... A low growl rumbled from Blaine's throat. I will never hurt you. Especially you. My wolf lost control earlier and I apologize. But your father started it. You should never have crossed my territory without permission, and he knows it. That's a penalty punishable by death in my pack, and I won't apologize for fighting him. At least, he's alive. I frowned at his reply. Yes, he had the right to kill my father for trespassing his land. After all, it was a pack law, but he's still my dad, and if Blaine's pack, then he needs to learn to get along with my father. I sighed angrily, deciding to ignore his comment about my father. He was clearly tense, and I began to rub hands down his back in an attempt to reassure him. I know you would never hurt me, Blaine, but you haven't got the best reputation. My father is being fearful. He's worried about me being in possible danger. I continued. Your father has nothing to be fearful or concerned about. I would never harm my mate. He said, his eyes glazed at me with promise as he spoke every word slowly. But you're willing to hurt me emotionally. And he would. If he thought it was perfectly normal to threaten my family, then he needs to get his head out of the gutter. He needs to learn to treat my family with respect and vice versa. He just looked at me. He didn't need to say anything, as we both knew that he would and could. You're mine. Nothing and no one will take you away from me. He said a few minutes later. He said it more to himself than to me, as if he was trying to reassure himself. I was beginning to get annoyed at his attitude. I was no possession of his. Blaine, I'm going to go back home with my father and his pack for a little while. I already feel homesick, and there are people that I need to say goodbye to now. Blaine, I will be going whether you agree or not. My siblings are there, and so is my best friend, and I will not leave without a goodbye and a promise to see them soon. I made sure my voice was stern when I spoke to Blaine. He thrived on weakness and fear, and it was something I was hoping to never show him. I said no. He repeated with the same hard look in his eyes. I will be leaving. I say, and walked past him back to his room. He follows after me, and I can feel the heat from his anger radiating off of him. You're not leaving. His voice slipped into a growl at the end as his eyes darkened. That was a warning to me, warning me that his wolf wanted to show his presence. Let me see my family and have them get used to the idea of me not being there. I need to say goodbye to my friends and family. His teeth came out and a snarl erupted from his throat as he got it out in arm's reach of me. A low growl of annoyance left my mouth. Why are you so goddamn stubborn? I shout. Blaine slammed the door roughly behind him and grabbed onto my wrists, pulling me towards his chest, sending sparks to shoot through my nerves. I don't think I made it clear when I said you were mine and only mine. And that means you won't be going anywhere, demanding much, I said while mentally rolling my eyes. Blaine growled, his eyes narrowing on me but not wavering from his decision. Deciding to blackmail him into thinking he had upset me, I began to look down, my eyes not meeting his as I purposely got emotional. You can't try to control me all the time. Mates are meant to be equal, Blaine, but you treat me like I'm below you. I have alpha blood running through my veins just like you, and I understand that you have had a difficult childhood. I stopped talking when a pained look crossed his face, and I instantly felt bad for mentioning his upbringing. It was a sore and touchy subject to him, and every pack knew the supposed story about how his father killed his mother in a frenzy of rage, causing Blaine at 15 to murder his father and take his duty of alpha at a young age. I've only just found you, and I don't ever want to lose you. He whispers. His voice holds anger, sadness and hurt. It pained me to see my mate hurting. I brought up memories which I know he wishes to forget. Blaine, please, just let me do this, I whispered. He was making it difficult. I didn't want to be away from him, but I needed to see my family and say goodbye. Please, don't make this any harder. My voice was thick as I attempted to hold back the tears welling in my eyes. He shakes his head in refusal, Before taking a few steps towards me, I can't do that. He tells me once my back hits the wall. His close proximity made my breath hitch in my throat and my heartbeat go into a crazy frenzy. I tried to push him away as I placed my hands on his stomach. His ABS felt like rocks under my fingertips, making my wolf-heir appreciation and my need for him grow. I tried to fight it as much as I could. "Blaine," I whispered pleadingly, my eyes closing gently. I felt him place his hands above my head, closing me in, his breath softly fanning my face, causing me to slowly open my eyes. "You're mine, like I am yours," he said before crushing his lips to mine. His lips felt desperate, causing my heart to hurt. I couldn't help but respond. My wolf was whimpering, fighting against the soon separation of our mate. She didn't want to leave him, but I needed to push forward. I pulled away from him, not wanting to give in, knowing that if I stayed in his arms any longer, I would never find the will to leave. "I promise I will meet you at the border every day. You just need to trust that I will come back to you," I said with so much emotion leaving my voice. I just needed him to understand. He stayed there for a moment, just looking at me, as if he was assessing if I was lying or not. A frustrated sigh left his mouth as he had a silent battle with himself. "Fine," he growled out. "But you will take 2 of my wolves with you, and they are to stay at all time." He didn't want me to leave, and I could see the pleading look in his eye, begging me to stay. I nodded before walking out of the bedroom with him following closely behind. There was a lot of tension between us, but I ignored it, knowing it was best. I slowly made my way down the stairs to see my parents, Ina and my father's beta and third standing behind them at the front door. I didn't say anything as I passed them, opening the door and heading outside. I sensed them all follow me as I exited Blaine's house, with Blaine trailing behind them. My mother gave me a questioning look, asking if I was sure I wanted to do this. I sent her a small nod before she looked at my dad's beta, silently communicating with him through their pack mind link. Without actually telling me, I knew she told him to round all the pack members ready to leave. My father's cars were already parked outside of Blaine's home, and from behind me I could hear the pack preparing to leave as the sound of car doors closed. Blaine stood at the back, closest to the front door, away from everyone. I walked through everyone and caught Lena's eyes, which gave me a begging look to not leave. She saw Blaine as her own son, and the thought of him hurting hurt her. I took a deep breath but continued to walk forward as I got closer to my mate. He didn't say anything or do anything as I approached. Once I was a foot away from him, I leaned forward and placed a lingering kiss on his lips. My wolf was cursing and crying at me from the inside because of my decision. Even though she knew it would only be a little while, she wasn't willing to leave without him. She didn't understand why I would be leaving the one person I was meant to love and cherish for the rest of my life, and she hated that we were causing our mate pain. I slowly walked to the car, fighting myself on whether or not I should go. I hesitated as I placed my hand on the door handle, looking back in the direction of where my mate was standing, only to lower my head sadly before hopping into the car. 2 of Blaine's protectors got into the car, one sitting on either side of me, trapping me in the middle. My mom and dad both got in the car, with my father driving, and he soon put the car into drive. My mom gazed over her shoulder to look at me sadly. In her eyes I could see her replaying how she ran away from my father. "He's a good guy, Dad. His wolf just got the best of him. He hasn't got a proper family like we have. He's just had a tough life." I heard my father taking a deep breath before exhaling, but he didn't say anything as we continued to drive down the path. "He's just doing exactly what you did with Mom all those years ago. He wants to protect me, to be the mate his father wasn't, but how can he do that if you can't let me go?" The car stayed silent after my little speech, but it was clear it caused a stir. My mom moved her hand to rest on my father's thigh as I could see through the rear view mirror that he was having an internal battle with himself, but he still didn't say anything. I turned my head so that I was able to look through the back window. A pang of pain went through me as I gazed at Blaine, who was clearly distraught watching me drive away from him. I bit my lip inside as I watched the transformation of him shifting into his wolf, his clothes ripped off his body, shredding onto the ground, as his large black wolf took off in the opposite direction and away from me. I woke up the next day in my warm bed in my parents' home. I reached my hands towards the ceiling and stretched like a cat before making a sound of a distressed dinosaur. I rolled out of bed feeling exhausted after yesterday's incident. A part of my brain was nagging at me for leaving my mate, but I quickly pushed it to the back of my mind that I would be seeing him at 12 this afternoon. I turned my head to my bedside drawer to see my alarm clock flashing 10:30. I needed to get ready, and I was surprised how late I woke up and I still felt tired. I was due to see Blaine soon, so I gathered some clothes that were already set out and walked into my bathroom. I decided to take a long shower. I was feeling tense at the thought of seeing Blaine made me nervous, but I groaned every time I attempted to wash myself as the bruises on my side are still raw. Once out, I dried myself quickly with a towel and shoved on my clothes. I felt the need to get back into bed and sleep longer, but I forced myself to head downstairs. I was immediately greeted with the two wolves Blaine had assigned to watch me. "Well, good morning, Sleeping Beauty," one of them said cheekily, and I recognized him as the one who laughed at my first meeting with Bladrian. I rolled my eyes playfully and a small smile graced my face as I looked at him. The sound of an annoyed grunt entered my hearing, and I turned to see the other guy glaring daggers at his pack member. His posture showed nothing but seriousness and determination. He only followed his alpha's rules, and he was all about authority. Well, my handsome self is called Diego, and this snuggle bear is Bryson. I looked back towards the guy who called me Sleeping Beauty, now knowing him as Diego. I stifled a giggle at what he called his fellow pack member. "Well, it's a pleasure to meet you both," I said with a slight nod. Diego wiggled his eyebrows before taking my wrist, placing a light kiss on hand. "The pleasure is all mine." This time I let out Earth. Bryson let out a warning growl and pulled me away from Diego and behind him. I was his alpha's Luna, and he felt that he was betraying his alpha by allowing another male to kiss my skin, even if it was my hand. "Diego, when will you learn? This is our Luna, so treat her like it." I rested my hand on Bryson's shoulder, knowing that his wolf was feeling protected and tense, and his muscles instantly relaxed under my touch. And I understood why. I was his Luna, and he felt the need to protect me, even if it was from a pack member willing to flirt with me. "Oh, don't be jealous. If you wanted a kiss, all you had to do was ask," Diego said, puckering his lips at Bryson. I bit my lip, attempting not to laugh, but failed. "I'm hungry, so why don't we go get some food?" I questioned with a grin, changing the subject. I walked away from them both and headed for the kitchen. From behind me I could hear them arguing. Well, Bryce and telling Diego off, and Diego teasing Bryson. I shook my head as I heard a whine, and no, that hurt. I could already picture Diego pouting after Bryson smacked him, most likely on the back of his head. Walking into the kitchen, I see my best friend Tilly standing facing the opposite direction of me, which I quickly ran up to her and hugged her, and she instantly hugged me back. "I was so worried about you. Don't ever do that again, Kennedy." She scolded at me, but her voice carried no anger. "I know. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. We hugged a little longer before she was suddenly pulled away from me into the arms of Bryson. He was gripping her tightly to his body with his head tucked into the crook of Tilly's neck while his face snuggled into her long dark hair, whispering mine over and over again. I was literally stunned but overjoyed for my best friend, who had been dying to meet her mate since she first shifted at 16. I was super excited and happy that my best friend would be in the same pack as me, and that I had at least one family member with me. I continued to watch as Tilly pushed herself closer to Bryson, leaving no gap between them before Bryson pulled away slightly to look over his mate, which caused Tilly to blush a rosy red. I giggled to myself as I knew how she wasn't just like her mother. She is very reserved. "What's my beautiful mate's name?" Bryson asked, looking at nothing but Tilly's eyes as if there was no one else in the room. She whispered, her cheeks turning redder and redder. A chuckle escaped Bryson's mouth as he looked adoringly at his mate and placed a lingering kiss on her forehead, which Tilly's eyes softly closed to. A cough brought them out of their little world. Diego was standing there smirking at Bryson. "Oh, you look like a lovesick puppy," he teased, which he received a low growl in response, but it died down when Tilly rubbed her hands up and on her mate's back, smoothing him. It was my turn to smack Diego on the back of his head. "Why does everyone do that?" he muttered to himself, rubbing the spot. I rolled my eyes and looked at Tilly and her mate. She gave me a look which asked if she and Bryson could hang out. I nodded in acceptation and looked at Bryson with a smile, but one which said, "But aren't you, Di?" He sent me a small smile and a nod before he allowed Tilly to pull him out of the room. I looked towards Diego, wondering what we could do before the meeting with my mate. I decided to eat before making any plans. So I opened the fridge to grab some milk to make some cereal that I grabbed 2 bowls from the cupboard before sitting down next to Diego on the kitchen stools. "Want some?" I asked as I passed him a bowl. He nodded before taking the cereal box from my hand, just as I was about to pour my cereal into my bowl. I growled playfully at him, which was returned with a smirk. After I was finally able to pour myself a bowl, Diego began questioning me about mine and Blaine's relationship. "So you and the Alpha, huh?" he asked while chucking more and more spoonfuls of Lucky Charms in his mouth, reminding me of my Uncle Eli. I nodded, not really sure on what to say. "What's he like?" he asked, suggestively, making me nearly choke on my cereal. We haven't," I said, feeling a blush appear on my cheeks at the thought of Blaine and I mating. Diego chuckled, sending me a teasing smirk which made me narrow my eyes at him for purposely trying to embarrass me. Before he could open his mouth to tease me more or ask another question, my mom walked into the room with my little sister Serenity, who came running full speed at me, jumping onto my lap. "Look what Knox did," she whined, pointing to a small bruise on her arm. I rolled my eyes at the thought of my brothers. It was because of them that I had an argument with my mom and how I managed to trespass onto Dark Apollo's territory. I pulled a playful pout before kissing her bruise, which she giggled at. She attempted to wiggle her way off of my lap, but ended up smacking her leg into my bruised side, causing me to take in a deep breath. My mom and Diego both looked at me worriedly, and my mom carefully pulled Serenity off of my lap and onto the floor before asking me if I was okay. "You okay, honey? I can get Michael to check up on you if you want." I shook my head. I didn't need our pack doctor to look at some bruising, and there was nothing he could do about it, so there was no point. She sighed before lifting Serenity up onto a stool opposite me. "How was your side?" "I saw what happened yesterday, and it was not pretty," Diego asked, looking at me. I groaned at the thought of yesterday. "It hurt like an absolute bitch," I told him with a huff. My mom's mouth gaped at me, shocked at my words. "Don't use such foul words." She scolded me with a flick of her finger, which caused Diego to snicker. "Okay. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeline Noble, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "I'm sorry," I said, putting my hands up into a defensive position. "Well, I better get going if I want to see my mate," I said as I glanced at the clock on the wall, flashing 11:35. "Let's go," Diego said, standing up from his stool, giving my mother a small nod. It was Diego's job to follow me wherever I went. He was my guard and protector. I made my way through the woods with Dio trailing slightly behind me, just in case something unexpected happened, like a rogue trespassed. It took me about 20 minutes in human form to get to the edge of the border where I would meet Blaine. I sat down underneath a tree which overlooked the border and waited for my mate to show. 3 whole days passed since I last saw Blaine, even though we agreed meet at the edge of the border every day at 12. On Wednesday I waited for hours, wondering why he hadn't turned up, in hopes he was running late, but by Friday it became clear that he was purposely ignoring me. I would still turn up every day anyway, just in case he changed his mind, and on Saturday he finally did. I was lying down in wolf form with my body laid out with my paws tucked under my chin as I stared into the distance of Blaine's territory when a figure began making its way towards me. My head turned slightly and my eyes narrowed, focusing on the figure. As it got closer and closer, I soon realized it was Blaine, which caused my wolf to begin purring at his appearance and finally able to have him in her presence. For the past few days she had decided to ignore me, furious that we left our mate. I quickly went behind the nearest tree and shifted, changing into a pair of shorts and a crop top before rushing out to see Blaine, who was leaning against a tree a few feet away. My body wanted nothing more than to push me towards him, but I feared rejection, as a distance look low made in his eyes. I was shocked as I saw dark bags underneath his eyes. He had been struggling to sleep. I bit my lip and leaned my body on my left leg, while nervously twiddling my thumbs. I didn't quite know why his presence made me so nervous. What happened to the old Kenny? I would usually flat out ask what his problem is, but I knew better than to aggravate my mate. Why haven't you been meeting me here? Are you aired at me? I asked, in a worried tone. He turned his head to look at me. Through his eyes I saw flashes of different emotions running through them, but one specifically stood out: hurt. My mate purposely left me, and you ask if I'm mad? His voice was calm, but I knew better than that. I took a step forward towards him. Blaine. His hand shot up, blocking me from coming closer to him, causing my heart to ache from his rejection. You're acting like such a drama queen, I stated, frowning, annoyed at his attitude. I kept up my half of the deal by meeting him at the border every day at 12, and he was mad at me. I waited for hours for you, and you're annoyed at me. I pointed to myself. I stayed out in the freezing cold even when patrol wolves told me to go home because you weren't going to show. But I stayed hoping that you would. Hurt lacing in my voice. A loud growl rose from Blaine's throat as he said, You left me, practically rejecting our mate bond. And why the hell would your father not demand you go home? You tell me that all he ever wants to do is protect you, but why would he allow you to stay out in the freezing cold? This is not about my father, Blaine. This is about you. And he did. He had to literally push me all the way back to the house. I want you as my mate, Blaine, but you're making it so damn difficult. I will not be mates with someone who is willing to treat my family the way you treat mine. My blood was boiling with anger, and I had no problem in letting Blaine know. He took a large step towards me, pulled me by my waist to his body. His chest was rising and falling in a fast pace as he took deep breaths to calm himself. My comment about not willing to have him as a mate infuriated him, and he pulled me closer. What did I tell you, Kennedy? My mate will never leave me, and I meant it. You've had far more than enough time to see your family and say goodbye. And now your time is up. Chapter 7. Blaine's POV. Anger and frustration was penetrating my heart, but I allowed it to boil up inside of me as I looked at my mate. A deep ache in my chest felt like my whole body was beginning to destruct as I watched her walk hesitantly towards me, preparing to say goodbye to leave me. I stood to the back of everyone, staying the closest to the front door. The thought of my mate willingly leaving me had both my wolf and I furious. He wanted nothing more than to force her to stay here, and we both knew we had the power and dominance to do so. Soon Kennedy appeared a foot away from me. We both stared into each other's eyes, and I purposely blocked my emotions and looked at her blankly. Whereas through hers I was able to see a mixture of emotions, from hurt to being unsure. She decides to ignore whatever internal battle she is having and took the final step towards me, leaving no space between our bodies. She leans towards me and places a lingering kiss on my lips before pulling away, ignoring the stares from the audience around us. I clenched my jaw tightly and forced myself to stay still on the spot as my mate began walking towards her father's car. A low growl of frustration left the back of my throat, annoyed that she was able to move away before I could snake my arms around her waist for another kiss. Once she maneuvered herself over to the car, she gave me one last longing glance over her shoulder before getting in, with two of my most trusted and vigorous protectors following after her, although the ego-spirited personality was questionable. The sound of the car door shutting soon closed off any of our communication, and my whole body was screaming at me to open the door and pull her out. My wolf wanted to be constantly holding her to our side and in arm's reach at all times. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Kennedy had already acknowledged and accepted our May bond. My wolf wasn't enthusiastic with the idea of her leaving, even though she promised to meet us every day at noon at the edge of her father's territory border. My whole being was screaming at me to refuse to let her leave, but I had already forced her to bear my mark without permission. Forcing her to stay will only make the situation worse, but her leaving will not be a permanent thing, and she certainly will be back on my territory by the end of the week. Her father, Gabriel, caught my eye as he gave me a quick look as if to say he was leaving. My whole body felt tense and I couldn't hold on to my anger anymore and allowed it to flow through me. I shook my shoulders in an attempt to calm myself down from attacking him, especially since he was Kenny's father. But the thought of using my pack law about killing any wolf that trespasses over my land without my permission lingered across my mind. In fact, I could already picture it. I had no doubts that if Kenny wouldn't despise me, that I would maliciously rip him into tiny pieces and put them on display in my living room where any male father figure deserved to go. Wanting them to be gone from my land, I glared straight at Gabriel before threatening him in a hostile tone. Get off of my territory before I do something that I probably wouldn't regret. It was clear Gabriel didn't appreciate the threat, as his familiar blue eyes turned black, while taking a step towards me, making both my wolf and I excited. We were both itching for a fight, and I sent a taunting smirk toward Gabriel as I took a step forward, but before the situation went any further, Kennedy's mom Lara stood between us both. My wolf had already pushed to the surface, and I had no problem in pulling Lara out the way carefully and pouncing on Gabriel. Just as I reached out to pull Lara out the way, Lena stood in front of me, both hers and Lara's bodies acting as a barrier between me and Gabriel. The pleading look in his eyes had my wolf slowly backing down. He instantly recognized this woman as our second mother, and she had looked after me and treated me as her own since I was 15 years old. She knew that I would never hurt her, which she constantly used as an advantage. She grabbed my arm and gently rubbed it affectionately, her eyes never swaying from mine. Let it go, honey. Kennedy wouldn't want you to do this. Her warm maternal voice flowed through our mind link. I inhaled a deep breath, cooling myself down before nodding my head at Lena. I heard Lara sigh in relief before sending me a small smile and ushering Gabriel to the car. Enthusiasm, Leda walked towards me and wrapped her arms around my waist while rubbing her hands up and down my back, comforting me. I wrapped my arms around her neck, pulling her closer, needing her motherly affection as I watched the car pull away. Lena stayed there for another minute before pulling away, and began walking to the front door, but not before squeezing my shoulder reassuringly. She knew I needed to be on my own, that she was silently telling me that she would be in my home if I needed her. I was stood still on the same spot as I slowly watched in the distance as Kennedy drove away from me. She had actually turned round, looking at me sadly as she got further and further into the distance. My wolf was internally fighting me to gain control and chase after the car and force it to stop. His emotions were so overwhelming and distressing that I needed to shift. My bones started to crack and black fur began to sprout from my skin as I shifted into my large wolf. I felt my clothes shred into tiny pieces before I took off in the opposite direction of Kennedy, forcing myself away from her. I raced through the forest until all my muscles ached, trying to resist the urge to turn round and chase after Kennedy. It was dark by the time I returned home. I walked in to find that Lena had fallen asleep on my couch. Not wanting her to be uncomfortable, I picked her up and made my way up the stairs and into a spare room, gently placing Lena under the covers before linking her mate Liam to let him know that his mate had fallen asleep and he was welcome to come and stay with her. Liam was a good man for Lena and of course was the beta for my pack before I overtook the alpha title. He wasn't like my father and never had been. He once told me that he used to have respect for my father before he changed into a malicious monster. Something many people call me now. I resented the thought of being anything like my father. shaking my head out of my thoughts before they took over, and made my way to my office. The second I opened the door, I was able to smell my mate's scent as it still lingered in the air. Walking around my desk, I fall back onto my chair, running my hands into my hair tiredly. My wolf was restless and I could practically feel him pacing up and down in my mind. He was furious that I allowed our mate to leave and was refusing to talk to me until we get her back. His mood was beginning to overtake mine. Deciding that I wanted to distract myself, I began looking at the piles of paper, work stacked on my desk before setting my mind to work. Blaine, wake up, it's nearly noon, I grumbled, ignoring the voice, by turning my head to face the other way. Blaine, don't you ignore me. I let out a low, aggravated growl before turning my head back to the sound of the voice to see Lena scowling down at me. I groaned as I lifted my head up, to see that I was still in my office. I'm not, I said tiredly, only to drop my head back onto the desk, causing me to groan once again. Blaine, surely you haven't forgotten that Kenny is meeting you at the Border Inn. Lena glanced at her watch before looking back at me. 20 minutes. I'm not going. I was in no mood to see her. She wanted to have time with her family, so I'd give her that. If I was to meet her, there would be no way I was leaving without her. Both my wolf and I felt anger towards the whole situation and decided that I would continue with work to get my mind off the whole thing. Kenny's waiting for you, Blaine. She promised to see you and you agreed, but now you're going to leave her waiting. Lena asked with a frown. She obviously wasn't impressed with my idea. She left me, not the other way round. I growled, annoyed. Well, you forcefully mocked her and we still need to talk about that. She was scolding me. I felt like I was repeating yesterday's events. You should go meet her like you said you would, Blaine. No, I have work to do. Don't you see all this work? I questioned, gesturing to the piles of paper scattering across my desk. She ignored my question and instead decided to make a demand, causing me to growl lowly, clearly getting irritated. Go get in the shower and see your mate. To my agent extraordinaire, Moonlight Lovers, hearts up, thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I'm not going. My voice held no room for her to question me further, and she left it at that. If any other wolf or human spoke to me the way Lena had, I would have painfully tortured them for ordering me around. At least shower and have breakfast so that you're not sulking in your office all day. Her voice had both aggravation and a slight plead to it. I knew she was just trying to be a caring mother, so I grunted before getting up from my chair, walking towards my bedroom. I yanked a pair of shorts from the rack in my cupboard, not caring to be gentle as hangers snapped and fell to the floor. I took a quick shower and changed into my clothes. As I was walking to the door, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I paused and walked closer, looking at my reflection. Deep scars covered my chest, unwanted memories and nightmares flashing through my mind like a movie, reminding me of the personal hell I was forced to endure as a child. I despised looking in the mirror as I looked identical to him. The very man who viciously murdered my mother in front of my eyes with no emotional hesitation, and told me it was a life lesson. A lesson to trust no one, not even your other half, the one person who was made for you. My wolf began growling. Maybe that's why she rejected us, because we're just like him. I ignored him and instead punched the mirror, causing a crack to split down the middle, shattering onto the floor. I stepped over it, not bothering to clean it up, then made my way to the kitchen where I could smell that Lena had made breakfast. I quickly ate before grumbling thanks and headed back to my office to complete the rest of my paperwork. Days have passed since I last saw or heard from Kennedy, and I had already had enough of not having my mate in arm's distance. I have felt Kenny try to call to me through our connection, but I knew that the moment I heard her voice, I would have shifted and crossed Gabriel's territory to get my mate back. But that wasn't what she wanted. She told me that she needed to say goodbye to her friends and family, and I've given her that. I had waited long enough, and now I was going to get her back, and if she refused, I have no qualms with dragging her back to my territory, kicking and screaming. I walked out of my house with nothing but the determination of getting my mate back. Walking towards the woods across from the house, I stayed in human form, deciding to walk there, seeing as it was only 1100 am and I still had an hour until I was meant to meet Kenny. Walking through my pack clearing, I noticed a few of my patrol wolves pacing up and down the border. Before crossing, I let them know that my beta is in charge until I get back, which would be later on today. They nodded and bowed their heads respectfully before continuing their jobs. Once I passed my territory line, I felt the pull and change of air as I entered no man's land. I knew it would have been safer to shift, but I honestly couldn't be bothered, so I instead kept all my senses on high alert. I soon noticed that I was getting closer to Kenny's father's territory. I then spotted a beautiful medium-sized brown wolf flying near the edge of the border and immediately recognized as Kennedy by my wolf impatiently pacing in my mind, barking at me to hurry up. As I continued to approach, I watched as she quickly rushed behind the nearest tree so she could shift back to her human form. I leaned against a tree a short distance away from where she last stood, her scent still lingering in the air, making my wolf restless. A minute later, she came out from behind the tree and I stood still as she slowly approached me, stopping a distance of about 5 steps between us. I looked over at her outfit, slowly taking in what she was wearing, making me growl in appreciation before lifting my gaze away from her body and to her eyes, giving her a distant look. Kennedy bit her lip, making me mentally groan as my focus shifted to her lips, but I ignored all of my instincts to reach up and pull her closely to my chest and instead folded my arms. Her body was leaning to the left. She was twiddling her thumbs, a sign of anxiety. It wasn't an uncommon emotion that I've seen when I'd been in the presence of other wolves, even humans. I didn't have a reputation for no reason, but it wasn't an emotion I wanted my mate to feel. Kenny's POV, what did I tell you, Kennedy? My mate will never leave me, and I meant it. You've had far more than enough time to see your family and say goodbye. And now your time is up. Blaine suddenly grabbed my hips, throwing me over his shoulder and walking towards his territory. He ignored my protests and his grip tightened, but never hurt. Not my screaming, kicking and punching made a difference or use. This is kidnapping. Blaine only laughed, amused. It's not kidnapping if you like it. I rolled my eyes, and he suddenly moved his left hand to my butt, letting it linger there. You better remove that hand before I remove it for you. As an embarrassed blush sported my cheeks, no. I could hear the smirk in his voice, making my hormones go into overdrive, but my rational side was furious. Put me down, I whined, and Blaine soon removed me from his shoulder, holding me in the air, my feet dangling down, not touching the ground. His face was inches from mine. I could feel his minty breath fanning my face as he stared deeply into my eyes. I gave you the time you asked for, and now you're coming home with me. His voice was stern and serious. I huffed at him, but before I could say anything else, he once again chucked me over his shoulder and continued walking. I pursed my lips slightly at his stern answer. I really didn't want to be hanging upside down for the whole journey. You're going to make me sick. Motion sickness and all. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Hoping to persuade him to let me down and walk there instead. I'd never denied that I didn't want him, he was just too possessive. He paused for a second at my request and hesitantly placed my feet to the ground, but not before looking me in the eyes for a few seconds. Don't attempt to run. I will catch you. Before leaning his head into my neck, placing a kiss on my mark, making my whole body shudder, before whispering that's a promise. I nodded stiffly, still buzzing from the feeling of his lips on my skin and wanting more. He sent a cheeky smirk my way before grabbing my hand in his and pulling me in the direction of his territory. We held hands as we walked back to his territory through unclaimed land, where rogues were free to roam. Rogues are wolves that have either left their pack or been kicked out. They were ruthless, soulless werewolves who don't care about rules or authority. When we finally made it to Dark Apollo's territory, Blaine's beta Adrian met us by the border. He welcomed me back, before telling Blaine about something to do with pack business. I was never interested with all of that, so I began walking in the direction of the house only to have my mate stop me. "Where are you going?" he questioned, his eyebrows furrowing as I turned around. "To the house." I replied, but it sounded more like a question. "I'm coming with you," he said before looking at Adrian, muttering that he would talk to him later. Grabbing my hand once again, he began guiding me in the direction of his home and into the kitchen. When we walked into the kitchen, standing in the middle of the room was Tilly, Bryson, and Diego. I frowned with confusion at their presence. "How did you get here? Before us?" I questioned. "Oh, you know, stole a car, went for a joyride, then got pregnant, and walked here after buying food," Diego replied, chewing on Doritos. I rolled my eyes and shook my head as Tilly provided me with the real answer. "We took my car. Dad said was okay." I smiled at my best friend. I was so happy that she would be the same pack as me. I would have missed her so much if she hadn't have found Bryson. Well, if Bryson hadn't found her. We all spoke for a while before Diego said that he needed to go home. "Time for me to go now, if that's all, Alpha," Diego said, looking at his Alpha for permission to leave. He got an odd in reply before he waved at us and left the room. "Yeah, it's about time Tilly and I left as well. I need to show her around before it gets too dark," Bryson said. Blaine nodded and I smiled reassuringly at Tilly, who looked unsure of herself, clearly anxious about staying at her mate's house for the first time. "We'll talk tomorrow," Blaine said to Bryson before they left, leaving me alone with my mate. But before either one of us could say anything, my phone rang. I smiled happily as my brother's name flashed on the screen. I was pleased that I remembered to put my phone in my shorts when I was preparing to meet Blaine. "Hello," I answered, putting the phone to my ear. My brother Kai started rambling about something stupid. I was practically rolling my eyes for the first 5 minutes of his phone call while Blaine stood on the opposite side of the kitchen counter frowning at me. "Do you know where Caden put my X-Men boxes? I really need them now," I said, scrunching my face up with the expression of "what the hell," before letting out a small laugh at his ridiculous question. "Well, if you do, then tell me. I really need them and I can't find them." He whined like a 5-year-old. He was 13 years old and he was devastated at the news that his X-Men boxes have gone missing. Not that his sister is now living in another territory and that he was ringed to tell me he was missing me. "Yeah, love and miss you to Kai," I replied, before pushing my phone back into my pocket and looked towards Blaine, who looked down at me with a frown. That was my younger brother. I confirmed, not that he had asked. "I know. I wouldn't let you speak to another male like that they weren't family," I smirked back, wanting to see how far I could tease him. "I mean, he's not really family, just a close family member that I nearly dated." Blaine's head quickly swirled over to mine, his smirk no longer there. I bit my lower lip and decided to make him chase me. I knew I shouldn't have teased him or wind him up, but I was enjoying it. I raced up the stairs into his room, but unfortunately I didn't have time to close the door. He was suddenly holding me by my arms as he held them up with his hand in the air against the wall. We were both breathing hard. His eyes darkened as they stared deep into mine, his wolf in control. His body was pushing against mine, and I pulled myself even closer, wanting to feel every inch of his warm skin flush against mine. I knew I shouldn't have teased him that way, and our skin touching was making my body feel as if it was burning, and the urge to have him closer was physically agonizing. Blaine nestled his head into my neck, nuzzling his nose against my skin to calm down. He was trying to control his breathing, inhaling plenty of my scent in the process, only for him to freeze and lowly growl, gripping my waist impossibly tight, almost crushingly. "You're starting your heat." Blaine lustfully growled from the depths of his throat, and the next thing I knew my back was laying on the bed. With my hips pinned down and Blaine towering over me, his green eyes darkened with desire. Don't let the story end. Subscribe to continue a Wolfpack legend.